Really thing. All right, so hi everybody. Welcome to episode 43 of celebrating the brand ambassador. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Alan Katz, the co-founder of New York Distilling, and Jeff Seymour, the brand ambassador for Woodford Reserve. Welcome, gentlemen.
Howdy.
Hi.
So today we're going to be discussing a bunch of different topics. We're going to talk a little bit about Jeff and Alan's backstories because they both have interesting. They really do have interesting backgrounds of what they've done in this industry before their current jobs and what they're doing now, as well as we're going to talk about some business. To talk about some of their best practices they have learned from their many years in the industry, as well from their current position. So, Alan, I'm going to talk with you because you're a distiller. You have such an interesting background. Done so many unique things between the food movement, slow food movement, to working in bars, to being a musician. I can't even name them all. So can you share with us?
Failed at.
Yes, all the things you failed at. But can you tell us your path that kind of led you to being a distiller?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, the short version, Elaine, is I always knew from the time I was 13 or 14 that I wanted to live in New York City. I didn't grow up here.
Me too.
Just something about it, visiting as a kid said, I want to be here. I didn't know that it would be in hospitality or specifically in distilling ultimately, but I knew I wanted to be here. And like the majority of us that don't have some white collar career path, which is never what I wanted to do. All I knew growing up is I didn't want, nor could I ever manage or sustain a job that required me to be at a desk. That was my starting point. And I moved here after college. I was pursuing music, as you sort of alluded to, and had some roots around that, but really got involved in bars and restaurants. And this was the early 90s. So at this point, it's nearly 30 years ago. And there wasn't the same cocktail movement as there is today. But I ultimately got a job or jobs, waiting tables, managing restaurants, bartending. And you could lump it all together at the time. And I was engrossed really in the thrill, truly, of hospitality. It was the same energy as the music business for me, and I was getting paid, which was much better than anything else I had done. And ultimately, I think it takes a certain tenor and personality where you sort of, no matter what it is you do, you want to dive into it, head first, feet first, and really feel like, one, hopefully you're lucky enough to be part of a community, but two, where are the avenues where I can stretch myself, where I can see myself making a living, and having fun most of all. And that involved those things. And ultimately, over the course of really the first 10 years that I had in New York City, it was a combination of, what do people eat? What are the latest chefs doing? I couldn't afford any of those things. I could read about them in New York Magazine. I was not online at the time. Or New York Times or other magazines that were coming out, the New Yorker, et cetera. And, stereotypically, I wasn't out buying these things. You took the subway several times a day. Oh, someone left a paper on the seat next to you, things that would never happen today. And say, I'll take that home, and you'd read up on things. And I got a chance to go to culinary school part-time by staging. I got a chance to bartend very inefficiently, but learn about ingredients. And ultimately, for me, I started doing some brand work. But before really there was a term brand ambassador, I wasn't considering it at the time. And I just, through a series of not good, but great fortune, got a chance to work with a few brands. They were national and international projects. And all of a sudden, I was being invited to distilleries. And this was pretty eye-opening. And you alluded to the slow food movement. I had never really traveled outside the country, but along that course in my first 10 years in New York, I ended up getting a job in, of all places, Northwest Tuscany. I had never lived there. I had never lived outside the United States, but you say, why not?
Yeah.
It's a really big sort of internal monologue or internal refrain for me. Why not? what's to stop me from doing this? There's no consequence. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I wasn't beholden to anyone but myself. And so the job opportunity came, and it was a whole revelation of a different part of gastronomy and food culture and hospitality from a different country or culture's point of view. And ultimately, I did come back to New York, and this was now the late 90s. And all of a sudden, I could feel, and certainly at the very least, several others that I knew, that you could see the bubbling, the precipice of what became this rejuvenated cocktail culture, at least in New York City, was on the verge. That at the end, really specifically of 1999, and I lived in the East Village at the time, there were 4 cocktail bars that were really monumental in New York City. There was Angel Share, still exists in the East Village, thank God. There was Passerby, Toby Cicchini's bar, the West Teens. There was the Rainbow Room, of course, which was too expensive for me to go to regularly. I went twice, but you knew that was where a certain set of professionals were going and drinking well-made cocktails. And then that New Year's Eve of 1999, Milk and Honey opened on Eldridge Street, and I was sort of conveniently geographically located in between the 3 downtown cocktail bars. And I could go and at least afford 1 or 2, and I mean weekly, at least into one of these places. And you could see the people coming in, that they were going to be influenced by this ethereal concept of patience around cocktails. If you could have patience around a handmade pasta and a lamb dish, you could also have patience around a well-made cocktail, even if it was a classic that no one knew about. That's something that really excited me. And all of a sudden, the brand work I was doing took me to distilleries, and the light bulbs went off for me, specifically visiting Plymouth Gin in England, of an urban distillery. And it took me more than a decade later, but that was the moment for me of, maybe I could open a distillery, and if so, in the place that I love most of all on the planet, which is New York City.
Didn't you work at the distillery too? Like you did a stage there?
Well, I got a chance to go to visit there and other places and participate and learn by watching and doing several visits, to visit Sean Harrison specifically at Plymouth, to visit Parker Beam, who was the long-standing, for 50 years plus, he was the master distiller at Heaven Hill. And through that, got to visit Chris Morris at Woodford and spend time with him, and Jimmy and Eddie Russell at Wild Turkey. And as you and I, Elena, discussed, of all my magnificent experiences with master distillers who became mentors to me, only one sort of shut the door as if to say, I'm not really interested in giving you the time of day, but virtually everyone else was not only an open book, but open with their time and generosity to say, if you'll commit to the time to come back, we'll spend the time answering questions, showing you what we do, and letting you formulate your own, if I will, philosophy and mainly list of questions that really begat ultimately what I wanted to do with New York Distilling Company.
No, it's amazing. And I know it's such a great story of like how you got to be where you are. And I do say it's a testament to the industry. I always say, if you're willing to learn, there is always somebody willing to teach you.
100%.
Within this industry, you just have to put in, but you have to show and put in the work and the effort. And I love and I would like to bring this up because I thought this was something for people to realize, because you kept in touch with all those people. You met them over the course of the years, but you wrote them actual letters.
Well, I still do. It wasn't a one-time thing. I just, to me, it's not advice I would give someone. It's just sort of common sense. But I'll be honest, I'm 50. And when I started this endeavor or enjoyment of hospitality, I was 21. So being around has just always been my nature. How do you make not just business interaction, but personal interaction the most personal it can be. A quick example is, we're ready to do some hiring without getting into the specifics. And I alluded to, this was literally this morning, the fact that everyone that we're not hiring, I'm going to make a phone call to. It takes literally no time at all. But the people I was discussing it with were shocked. I wasn't just going to send an email. Well, these people took enough time to spend with me. The least I can do is say thanks and give them a call, not with any other purpose, but saying, hey, we're human beings. Let's have a personal relationship. Maybe there's another path we'll cross another time in our lives. But for the distillers, I was so engrossed and so enthused by their willingness to spend time with me. It was the least I could do. I was just excited to put pen to paper. And it wasn't like a form letter. It was, I love doing this. I love the story you shared with me about your dad, your uncle, your grandmother who influenced you. Those are the types of personal things when I put in capital letters, how are we going to have fun in our lives, particularly these days? And that's what excites me.
No, I only reason I brought it up is because it is part of, I mean, Jeff is going to attest to it. Like, obviously in our industry, we meet lots of people, right?
Yeah.
And being a brand ambassador, your network really does become your net worth of all the different people that you meet and interact with. But not everybody is as good about keeping in touch with people. And one of the things I teach to some of the people that I mentor is, as soon as you meet, after you, just to your point about, you write a personal note, just even send a text, even if it's text these days, like, or an email, like, hey, I really enjoyed our conversation. Bring up a point of the story that they talked about. Like, I especially love when you told me this thing. So they really know that you were listening, and then just send it to them, and then just make a note. And now I just started doing this in the last couple of years. I took a networking course. So I learned a lot about this because I was really bad at it. To just like, okay, I'm going to look them up on social media, but I'm also going to make a note in my calendar to like reach out to them again. So in like 3 months, if we're not seeing each other regularly, like just, hey, hey, I was thinking about you the other day, or like maybe I see an article, something like that. My husband, Philip, is genius at it. He's so good. He comes back from business trips or more presents for other people than he does for us, and he will then mail to people all around the world. He's like, oh, like I remember you mentioned this book, or you mentioned this product, or whatever it is, and he does that all the time. I was like, what are you doing? And I was like, now I understand. Whenever we travel to any country, literally there's about 50 people who are so excited to see Philip anywhere in the world because he's kept in touch with them for over 30 years and done all these little things for them, whether it's hooking them up with something but it's a great practice. And it's something I think all of us could get better at. And it's why you are who you are. Well, Jeff, I'm sure you have your own networking practices, but I want you to talk about that. But I also want to talk about your background, because you've lived in multiple cities across the country, multiple different jobs, and kind of like Alan and kind of like myself, you kind of started in the industry not knowing a lot about drinks, but you kind of learned on the fly, even though I've never officially worked behind a bar. But I had to learn a lot about cocktails. But you were the head bartender. You've been a wine director. You've been a head bartender. You were a part-time brand ambassador, which we're going to talk about later on, before you moved to Woodford Reserve in San Francisco. But I love the circumstance that led you to tell us a little bit of your backstory, and then what led you to San Francisco and then Woodford Reserve.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Well, first I'm going to touch on the networking thing, and
yes,
little tip that I was told years ago by Jessamine McClellan. She, we were talking about networking, and, when you go to Tales of the Cocktail or BCB, Portland Cocktail Week, all of these things, right? You're going out, you're meeting everybody. Everybody's handing out business cards, everybody. And so you end up, you're emptying your pockets at the end of the night, try to make a note on, say, a business card and like where you met this person. And when you get back after Tales is over, you have this big bag of business cards, and just send a little note like, hey, what's up? Super nice to meet you. It takes 2 seconds, and you just spend, say an hour of your day just kind of reaching out. And then, after a while, you have this vast network of people all over the country. And, those little things of just like reaching out after, again, something like Tales of the Cocktail, if you're a bartender, a lot of those things go a long way to building up a national kind of community that you didn't know. And then, you know, those relationships will continue to build over the years. But that's always kind of a trick that I do all the time is, you know, what do you do with all these, you know, business cards that you get at different conventions, and just like send a little note, super nice to meet you. Even if you barely remember meeting the person, or the person might not remember meeting you, they'll remember getting that email from you, and that kind of little communication can go a long way.
No, it can't, because they're like, oh shoot, I did meet him. Where did I meet him? Then they look you up. Yeah, exactly. Because everybody's like, I think I met you at Tails. I'm like, it doesn't count, but it does count.
Yeah.
I do try to write a note. Somebody did give me an advice, and I did start taking where like I will write the note like at what party, at, you know, whatever it was. Like I'm like, give me a minute, like just writing a slur. Yeah. And then I also make notes because my memory is terrible. When I go into bars, you know, if I ask the bartender their name, and then I will quickly, before I associate them with a celebrity, like whatever celebrity they are, like they look like Luke Skywalker, or they look like, you know, Renee Zellweger, or whatever it may be. And then like literally it pops, it just, or a celebrity to their name. So it's like, oh, Renee, and Renee Zellweger. And like, it kind of helps me remember. And then I'll put a note in my note file, like I'll put the bar name, and then I go into my notes, and then I write a description, like has a tattoo, and I have to be descriptive because everybody has one, you know, right? Like, you know, whatever it is, has a mustache, looks like this person, and, you know, I was here on this day. And if they say anything like they have a dog, I can write that, like, you know, whatever it is. And then before I go into the bar again, I make sure I look at my notes because I won't remember it all.
We used to have behind the bar, underneath the till, we would have a big list of regulars with like a little note about them. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like we'd get their name and you'd go and write it down. It's like James, you know, the bald guy with the beard that drinks the IPA at happy hour. And so, oh shit, there's that guy that comes in all the time to kind of pull it out and all these little notes, and kind of take that with you, and, you know, kind of build on that as you get further on in your career. Little notes like that always help with the memory.
No, I once built to that. Chris Lauder. Alan, you know Chris, right? You know that he's insane, right? Like where like the practices that he does. So he literally had photographs of all the people, and then he had like a book, and he would have notes on it, and he would every day look and memorize them. So he would just like commit them to memory. So he would like have flashcards of the people. Wow. So if he could see their face, he could remember exactly who they are and what their drink was. He was committed.
That's unique.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was a whole nother level. Anyway, all right. So great stories, great tidbits.
Anyway, so I'm originally from New Mexico. I'm from Albuquerque, and I kind of came up in fine dining, and a lot like what Alan said. I mean, I was just kind of, when I first got into hospitality industry, which was in college, you know, that's when I first started, you know, waiting tables, and that kind of led me to being a fine dining waiter, which led me into kind of my love for wine that I still have today. But really diving into the wine world and production side, and, you know, led me to, you know, getting my sommelier, you know, first certification. And I ended up becoming a wine director because the restaurant that I worked at for years didn't have a liquor license. So I was doing this, finished college, and I ended up leaving. I was like, nope, I'm gonna go get a real job now that I have this like fancy piece of paper. And, you know, a little bit into that, just realized that I love the hospitality industry, you know, and I dabbled in grad school and law school, and I just ended up forgetting all of it and wanting to go back to the hospitality industry. There was just something about it that I really loved. So we kind of had to learn on the fly once, you know, this restaurant of ours got our liquor license, and just kind of figuring out what ingredients went together. You know, that's when I got all the books and started reading on classic cocktails and, you know, actual, you know, mixology and kind of what goes in what, and how to make a syrup, and what does a 2-to-1 syrup mean, like all the little bartending 101 things. And that kind of led us to opening up a cocktail bar. And I remember we had the company mixologist for Southern Wine and Glazers came and took us through this like crash course of, you know, how to properly stir a cocktail, when do you stir versus when do you shake, like all these little things. And then I was, you know, visiting cities like San Francisco, or I'd go to New York, you know, this is in the early 2000s, maybe 2002, 2003. I would go to these bigger cities and then, you know, kind of see the cocktail development and what was happening, you know, kind of like Alan was saying, you started seeing the it bubbling over and the enthusiasm that everybody had about cocktail making. And then I would go back to Albuquerque, which was, of course, way behind the times, what was happening in the larger metropolitan areas on the coast, and be like, oh my gosh, we should be trying this and kind of bringing some of those elements to our cocktail bar in, small town New Mexico. Anyway, that's kind of what led me. I knew that, in Albuquerque and being from New Mexico, I wanted to take my career in bartending and into, kind of another level that I couldn't really do in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And that's kind of what led me up to Portland. I had always loved the Pacific Northwest, especially coming from the desert, it's like the trees and the rain and everything. But, the cocktail and food scene, even this is 2006, 2007 in Portland, was really booming. And I was just really turned on by the culture that was happening there. So I moved up and that kind of led me to, I worked at a few different bars, and I ended up opening and I ran this big whiskey cocktail bar in Portland that I did for 5 or 6 years. And then I moved over to another whiskey bar and kind of like doing education, having different brand ambassadors from around the country would come in, and I would always want them to do an education at my bar, regardless of, whether it was gin or whiskey or whatever. I was just constantly kind of thriving for that knowledge. And that part of it is I kind of progressed in, my bartending skills and everything. It's also kind of what led me into really loving wine, is I was just thirsty for the knowledge and the production side and how it was made. And, that kind of leads you into all the smoke and mirrors that's behind, especially in the whiskey community, on, what is actually good juice, who's actually making their whiskey, versus just buying and throwing a label on it. So anyway, all of this stuff kind of encompassed around the knowledge of, what I was gathering from different brands that would come by my bar. So at the time I had, been in Portland. I had been there for about 10 years working in whiskey bars. And I had the opportunity to move down to Los Angeles. And again, it was kind of like I had hit this ceiling of what I could do professionally wise in a smaller market like Portland, outside of, somebody giving me capital to end up opening my own bar, which I had kind of flirted with for a little while. But I just wasn't really sure about that. And again, like the brand side had always piqued a particular interest in me. And I knew those opportunities were going to be much more relevant in, Los Angeles than they were in either Portland or Seattle. So I moved down to Portland, I moved from Portland down to Los Angeles, and I had known Yelvin Groff for a long time. And so I ended up talking with her, and she was like, hey, I would love for you to work at the Spare Room. So, I met Mark and Med, and then, that kind of led me to working at the Spare Room. And during my time there, I had known Brooke Arthur from House Spirits Distillery and Aaron Hayes for a long time, just because the distillery is based in Portland. So anytime they would come up, they would come into the bar, and we just kind of developed this relationship. And I was having lunch with Brooke one day, and she was like, hey, would you ever think about doing some part-time brand work? And I was like, yeah, I really love House Spirits, and, I love your team and you, obviously. So yeah, let's talk. She was like, well, that's great. I need somebody in Los Angeles, just part-time. And, these are SKUs. This is what you would do. And so my direct boss, which was Aaron Hayes at the time, she kind of took me under her wing, and, we did that part-time while I bartended. And so it was kind of finding that work balance of,
we're going to talk about that.
Having to hit these goals within, my brand ambassador position, but then also needing to be at the bar, that sometimes we would close down at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And so when was that kind of period? And then also when was my time to, have to myself, because you just need that balance. But while I was there, I entered a cocktail competition for Lustau for sherry, and then ended up making it through the finals. And I was a finalist, one of the final 4 in the country. And so they took the final 4, and we all got flown out to Madrid and went down to Jerez. And when I flew into Madrid, in the hotel lobby there, I met my wife. She was also competing in this competition. And she was like, Jeff Seymour. She heard me checking into the hotel. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Helen Diaz, nice to meet you. So anyway, we met there. And then after, getting back to California, it was, you know, one of those things where I was like, all right, well, I'll move to San Francisco. And so one of the first people that I told is one of my best friends and who actually married us, and his name's Luke Ford. And so Luke Ford was the Los Angeles brand ambassador for Woodford at the time. And so I told him, I was like, hey, I think I'm going to move up to San Francisco. And he's like, oh shit, you know, Woodford is going to be hiring this position in San Francisco soon. And I was like, oh my God, I love Woodford. He's like, I know. He's like, so, you know, get your resume together. So I ended up, you know, sending it to him. My wife works for a distillery in California that also goes to our same distributor. And so she was like, oh, this position's open up. I'll know the people at the distributor who you're going to need to see. So I just kind of like sent out my resume through the proper channels that got the ball rolling. And then, you know, it just kind of worked out, you know, it was very serendipitous, me moving here and then the position opening up. And it just happened to be with a brand that I really, really love.
The stars were really aligned. Like you met your, I know, right?
Yeah.
You met your wife. She happened to live in San Francisco. You're in LA. Also, they're feeling you're willing to, you know, move. And then this job just happens. You put it out there in the world, and I know it's hokey, but I do believe you put it out in the universe, and the universe does bring it back.
And I think, you know, we had chatted a little bit. I knew that I was going to move up here, and I was like, you know what? Regardless, I'll be able to bartend. You know, if this job falls through, you know, because there's lots of, you know, tons and tons of interviews that you have to go through, and it's a big process, you know, at least for Brown Foreman. And so it's like, I'll at least be able to get a bartending job. I know how to bartend really well, and I, you know, have a good resume. And so moving to San Francisco, you know, was happening, and I had packed up my U-Haul, and I walked my dog down to the coffee shop right before I was coming back to get in my U-Haul and drive it up to San Francisco when I got a call from like our HR department, like offering me the job. So it was like the day that I left San Francisco when they called. So again, it was just like the stars aligned.
It's such a great story. I love that story. And Alan, unlike you, I don't think Brown Foreman, probably as lovely as they are, probably doesn't call anybody to let them know they didn't get the job.
I don't know. Maybe.
Somebody who's worked for large corporations, I used to get calls from people, and they were like, Elaine, I still haven't heard from anybody. Like, they would gone from the interview like months. And I was like, and I would go, and I was like, I know we're still looking. And I realized, I'm like, oh my God, you're still actually on the list of people that they're going to call back. It takes months for big companies to hire. I've always told people, the process is so slow. Yeah. And if you do know somebody in a company, I'm like, please tell them so they put your name on top, because you're amongst like 500,000 other resumes. And I definitely know MKTG never called anybody to let them. They barely let you know you had the job, rather than you didn't get the job. Anyway, love that story. Love the fact that you're up there and you met your wife, and that's what all this thing. How long have you guys been married now?
We got married in September, so just like 5 months. Yeah.
Ah, very sweet. All right, so we're going to switch on to the business side of things, even though we already started talking about it when it comes to the network. So, Alan, I'm going to direct this to you. So you've had your distillery, right, for 10 years?
Yes.
All right. So, and obviously to keep growing, the goal is to be selling your brand across the country and hopefully around the world, which obviously in America requires you to have a distributor, which is never the easiest thing. So this is a question, because there's so many small brands out there, so many distilleries. I have conversation with a lot of small brand owners all the time who want to have brand ambassadors, and I'm like, do you have a distributor? And I'm like, get that first, you know. So tell us a little bit of your story, because I know you have a story about like when you got your distributor and like when you believe a brand is ready to have a distributor.
Yeah, you know, it's a real toggle back and forth, because in an ideal world, part of your planning process, if you're a small brand, we're a small brand. We have a 5,000 square foot distillery in Brooklyn. We now have some aging warehouses outside the city in upstate New York. But part of your planning process, ideally, is that you're going to have people who represent your brand. And you learn lessons along the way, learn lessons from other people, as we've already covered a little bit. And I can tell you, more than anecdotally, it's a real tug. We opened and we had the most basic thing we did was in year one, we said we're only going to distribute in New York City. It's our home market. We were fortunate enough to know lots of people here. Let's get off the ground and, in our minds anyway, work out the rest of the kinks of production, operations, running the business. We have a bar attached to the distillery, and figure all those other things out. And constantly, you're getting calls. 5 calls a month, even that from Los Angeles or San Francisco or Chicago or Miami or Boston or Portland. And it's exciting. And you say, wow, the demand must be out there. I should take the time to look into it. And it's a fallibility of mine I'd almost revise it and say, go down every rabbit hole.
Right. And you're talking about calls from bars, right? Bars calling you out.
Yeah, accounts that could legitimately buy your product. And it's hard to say no to them. It's hard to say no to yourself. You have the mentality of a sale is a sale is a sale. And the truth is, we didn't capture all of those opportunities, but we opened the door to a few of them. And every single one of them having nothing to do with COVID, long before the current scenario of pandemic, et cetera. We opened these other markets, and then ultimately we retreated from them because we didn't have the right plan in place. We didn't have the financial means. We didn't have, and I'll get to the distributor part quickly, the concept of how we were going to interact with the distributor from a sales standpoint really set up for at least a year. I think you should have at least a 2-year plan in place minimum. But the concept of working with a distributor beyond your home market obviously is a necessity, but you want to have the strongest possible relationship. And it's challenging as a small brand because you don't keep as many light bulbs on as Brown-Forman or anyone else that are recognized brands nationally and internationally. Nevertheless, there's some cachet to what we do. We're a little more nimble. We can collaborate a little more effectively. We're not tied into a legal department of a dozen or more people to say you can do this and you can't do that. Oh, a good idea. Let's do it. Doesn't always mean it's going to come out right, but we can try those things a little more nimbly. And again, there's some preciousness to, it almost feels like a pat on the head sometime. Wow, you're doing it in the middle of New York City. Hey, let's take a look at it at least. Now, you've got to take advantage of those opportunities. But to work with a distributor this day and age, where there's such consolidation and you want to create realistic expectations on sales growth, because if it's going in the other direction, there's no point in working with a distributor. So you really have to set realistic goals and terms for growth, but you have to know that it's going to take some brand representation and effort on your part, one, but two, the interaction with brand ambassadors, et cetera, to make this fly and to make this successful. And you've got to have a realistic sense of what that's going to cost and how much time you need to interact with that person, or hopefully in larger markets, people, maybe at least 2 people, because it's a competition out there. And you need to let people know not only that you exist, but, hey, this is our competitive set. And I'm not necessarily, very honestly, looking to take something off someone's back bar or take it off their retail shelf, but say, this is my claim as to why our brands belong in perhaps a more recognized competitive set, and let it feed off, the acumen and awareness of brands that have been around a lot longer than ours have. But it takes people and it takes lots of planning to say, let's put an idea in place and help guide a distributor who in today's age is a sales tool, but really is sometimes at best and sometimes at worst, the legal means to have your product distributed to the people that can get it to the end user, to consumers.
So no, that's such a good point. You really do have to have a sale. They are the sales tool, and you definitely need to be able to give them the support. And if you're not interacting with them often, as you mentioned, they'll forget about you as well. But and in your mind, what do you think is the if you can afford it, what you should have in a marketplace at the bare minimum? If you open a market,
If it's a market that's important to you, the bare minimum is one person. If you're talking about, the immense markets of New York City and Los Angeles, just to take, probably the two largest, but I would include Chicago. You probably want two people. It doesn't have to happen all at once, but there's also something that at first may feel intangible that very quickly becomes tangible and vital, and that's fresh eyes on things. You want to try and hire people that are not of the same mold, whether it's same gender, ethnicity, background, age, bringing that mix into play, which sort of feels like it's trendy now, is very obvious because there's so many parts of the marketplace that we can all be selling our products, and there's only so many hours in the day. And the creative juices that flow become not just vital, but they're exciting. It's what keep things alive and new, and I think forward thinking also, to help find the best places for the brands at any given time. But I would say the bare minimum is one, because the things you're putting on that person's shoulders are not only distributor relationships, which are vital, and think of, any big sales division from a distributor and around our country is going to have anywhere from 20 to 50 people, and that person has to manage. You're not going to have relationships with all of them, but is going to manage the key relationships, the people that care the most about your brand, the people that they report to several times a year, the distributor's management team. But they also have to really focus on the sales relationships between the different accounts that they're going to focus on as well.
no, that's such great points, and I love the idea. You're right. Having a diverse, because you have your own mindset and ways of working. So the more diverse and that you can bring out, so they're looking at things in a much different way, brings so much more creativity to the team. And so they do have to have more experience than just being. I mean, you could be a very experienced brand ambassador, but you have to be one who becomes more of a market manager, because you are dealing with a distributor, which is a different skill set.
I agree, but I would also distill it down as you really are, equal to the management, the founders, whatever size brand it is you've got to come in, really being as big a brand champion as anyone else in the organization, as the front face representation of the brands in the company.
No, absolutely. And so we're going to talk about this, because I know what a lot of brands do is a lot of people come and they want to hire a part-time brand ambassador. And Jeff, this is going to be addressed to you. And I know, Alan, you and I have had conversations about this, because, you wanted to have some support on the marketplace. And it is, I see it, a lot of brands use it. And it is a good tactic, right, to have out there if you can't afford full-time, to get some quick wins. But it's not an easy job. And Jeff, you can talk from your own personal experience, because it sounds easy. People are like, oh, I can handle that. I've interviewed a lot of people for the role, and they're like, oh yeah, it's 10 hours a week. I can do 10 hours. And, and they don't realize how to budget in 10 hours into your week, because that's actually a lot of time. So Jeff, can you tell us, because you were a part-time brand ambassador for the House Spirits Distillery, while working as a bartender at the Spare Room, just give us an idea, what it was like, and how you had to managing your time, and what your week kind of looked like for you.
Yeah, I mean, it does come down to the difficulties. Like when you're saying it is only, when it's only 10 hours a week, that's easy. That's super easy. I go to bars for 10 hours a week, no problem. But when you're going to bars, whether that's after a shift or, later at night, in those normal times, that's not when a buyer or somebody wants to see you, right? Especially when working for House Spirits, we had such smaller brands. So, it was, setting up appointments, doing trainings, doing tastings. How are you going to fit this in when you're about to go work also an 8-hour bar shift and be at work, super late? So it takes a ton of planning, and it's not that easy. And luckily, the way that House Spirits kind of did things for me, we didn't have a ton of admin. I think one of the things from a brand perspective that you don't understand when you're coming into it is how much admin you have and how much time you're in front of a computer, how active you are on your calendar and, spreadsheets and time management. That's one of the key aspects that I think you have to have if you want to get into this side of the business.
Absolutely.
So, that's kind of exacerbated, when you start talking about doing part-time work, because at least for myself at that point in time, the only thing that I needed to know, leading up to that point was, what time do I need to be at work? Right. In my calendar, like if I had, running bars, if I had somebody coming in, obviously, I would pencil in meetings and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's just like, I need to be at the bar at this time, and then I get off when I get off. Once you start, kind of doing more time management, working for a brand, you really have to hone in those skills and have that balance. Because if you're just trying to wing it all the time and like, I think I can manage to go to like these 3 or 4 bars, like before I go in for a shift, you're not going to be successful. You have to kind of go in with a game plan. And then kind of what I talked about at the beginning, I would also schedule at least one day a week, because when you're putting on 10 hours on top of bartending full time, so I would be behind the bar for 30 hours a week, which would take you until sometimes the middle of the night. And then adding, 10 to 15 hours per week doing brand work, you can easily lose track of every single day of the week. And so I would also kind of make sure that I had at least one day a week that was just mine, that I would kind of turn everything off, not do phone calls, not schedule appointments, not schedule a shift or pick up a shift, because, that mental state of mind was also just as important as, getting both jobs done.
It's such a great point. It is mentally challenging, and you do need a day off. And that's the questions I used to ask people, because they were like, well, I have one day off. I'm like, so you want to plan your one day off and you want to do brand work? And they're like, yeah, I can do that. I was like, no. I was like, if you want to do this, you're going to have to drop some shifts. And I realized we'd have to make it worthwhile for you to drop some shifts. But, if you don't think it's worth it, I said, but you need a day off. And it does take a lot of planning, and time management is not something that everybody's very good at. And didn't you say you used to like book your appointments? You'd find out what all your day accounts were, right? So
yeah, exactly. I would figure out what the day accounts were that I could go into, if it was just kind of stopping by, saying what's up, showing face and, kind of building those relationships. And I would go in, during the day and schedule it out, or I would try to, schedule those meetings in that sweet spot of when you can catch kind of a buyer before, a dinner shift or a happy hour starts in the middle of the afternoon before I would go in. And so sometimes my day would go from noon until 4 o'clock in the morning. So because I would go out and hit these accounts and then, go straight into, go to the bar, spare room, and we, close it down. And then, so it can lead to very, very long days because you have to get this work done, especially, and, I don't know of too many part-time ambassadors that aren't coming from the bar world.
Right.
And so, it's not like you're working this 9 to 5 job and then you get off work and kind of can go do your brand stuff until 7 or 8 at night. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And so it just goes back to this like time management and how organized you are, or you can burn yourself out just really, really quickly.
And I would add, from the ambassador's viewpoint also, it's real key, I think, up front to ask not only for initial but ongoing training. And it's not just training about the brands, but things like time management sometimes can take training, or the other aspects of hospitality or the culture of the city you're working in. I think ongoing training helps with, I would say, mental and physical stability and keeping the work focused and fresh in a positive way. But that way you stay connected, even in these days when you don't see the people you're reporting to as regular as you might. It says, okay, I'm continuing to hone a certain skill set that's meant to drive home whatever it is you're responsible for.
It's so true. It's actually in the Brand Ambassador Academy, we have an entire section. It's all about time management and productivity. because teaching people how to manage the multiple projects, because it's not easy. It's something you develop over time. But when you get into that role, you do need to plan a lot. And most people, as you said, Jeff, don't realize how much time you spend in front of your computer, and you should, and your calendar, looking at your week and being like, okay, so this is the nights I'm working, these are the shifts, and then you have to make all those appointments and things. So you have to spend time doing that. So, a lot of people hire people for 10 hours, but it's always more than 10 hours because,
always more than,
it's like, I got hired for 10 hours, but I spend 5 of that because I'm spending an hour planning on this day, another hour doing this. And then also there's a travel time, especially if you're in LA, in between accounts, you're driving. So, breaking that down, sometimes I'm like, you're not really hiring them for 10 hours. I'm like, 10 hours, they might physically, 5 hours actually in an account.
And I can't think of a scenario otherwise, but I would say out loud, frankly, that no brand owner, no brand manager wants to hire a part-time brand ambassador. They want to hire full-time brand ambassadors. They're doing it or putting it out there in the sphere, in the realm, because that's what they can afford to do.
Yep.
So it really, in the best case scenario, having failed at this relationship several times, is to really develop a great rapport for communication.
Yes.
Not just what are the expectations for this month or this quarter, but are we interacting enough? Are we communicating enough? Are there things we could do better in both directions? Because it's a mismatched relationship from the start. Mm-hmm. It's a relationship out of necessity. And so to collaborate on how to better succeed and create these goals out for the brand ambassador is something that really should be a two-way street. I think even more so when it's a part-time role.
No, I definitely, I agree. Because if you can have as a brand ambassador, be able to have that honest relationship, like that conversation, and be like, look, this is my week this week, so, I have this crazy, I got booked for another party and whatever it is, because that's where I'm making my money. So I really only have this time. So this is what I'm thinking this week. So what do you think? This would be my most important thing. And I'd rather that honesty. So it's like, okay, so let's look at the following weeks and whatever it is. But when you have that pressure, I used to have brands, well, why didn't they make, 5 placements? I'm like, because nobody's going to make that many placements in 1 week. They're like, they told me they had all these connections. I'm like, they do. But that doesn't mean that person's going to bring their brand on the first visit that they go to their bar.
And that's why I mean that both communication in both directions, because how many times a year is a menu actually going to change?
Right.
Yeah.
Because people come on, I'd be like, I was like, it's October. Like, you're probably not in November. You're not going to get it in November. I'm like, maybe a feature, maybe first, but nobody's changing their menu right now. So us giving them a KPI for menu placements, it's just setting them up for failure.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, actually, let's talk about that because actually, I know I'm skipping a few questions, but we already started talking about it, so I want to go into it. So gaining menu placements obviously is something that, as a brand ambassador, as a brand owner, is something that is one of our major goals, because we all know it drives volume, right? So it's something we all would like to achieve. It's on every brand ambassador's KPIs, but there are definitely tactics of doing this well, right? So I want to talk about it from a few perspectives. So Alan, I would like you to talk about it from one from being an owner and some of the things you use. We were talking some things you use for like Perry Tot to get it on a menu, but also you also own a bar. So we'll start with that, about how you decide what brands go on your menu, not just from like the creative point, but like for a brand ambassador. And then Jeff, I know you have strategies you use within your accounts, but Alan, talk about, how do you choose?
We make gins and rye whiskey, and, I can talk about profitability and the different things we focus on, but our alignment has always been first and foremost with bartenders, with on-premise work. It's where my background came from. And we thought, well, that's how we'll educate the consuming public and then bring in the retail space and further address and create relationships in that part of the category. But, Perry's Tot is one you bring up where, it's an expensive gin to make, primarily because it's Navy strength and at 114 proof, it doesn't cost more in terms of its production. Once upon a time, the astronomical price difference was because tax on distilled spirits is based on proof. And it's not completely relevant for your session today, Elaine, but it's worth looking up for those who are listening. Look up the history, the recent history of the federal excise tax on distilled spirits. Very shortly, the federal government reduced the excise tax for the first time since the Civil War. Wow. And they reduced it by about 80%. And we were looking at products that weren't necessarily our lead dogs, which is Ragtime Rye and Dorothy Parker gin, but something that was charming, that had a great bartending following, and that was Perry's Tot, this Navy strength gin. We thought, well, the savings would be most significant because the tax reduction from what it was at 114 proof and then what it became, the federal excise tax. I'll give you the short context. The wholesale price before they reduced it, 48% of it was the federal excise tax.
Wow.
Not state tax. In New York City, there's a city tax, not distributor markup of 28 to 30%. Half of the wholesale price was federal excise tax. That was reduced 80%. And we decided, well, let's pass 70% of that in through the wholesale pricing onto our customers. And so it created a great door opener. You're doing what? What? That's crazy, Alan. There was an article in the Times, and I loved it, but it stacked all these craft distillers on one side of, we're going to invest in equipment, we're going to invest in people, we're redoing our lease. You'd have to be crazy to reduce your price because there wasn't a guarantee that they were going to make it permanent. They ultimately did, which we didn't know was going to happen. And on the other ledger was, Alan Katz at New York Distilling Company is taking another tact. He's passing the savings on to his customers. And the goodwill not only got a lot of Perry's Tot placements, even in the well, but it opened the door for us to really introduce the range of Ragtime Rye to these same customers. Now, you got to be prepared for your, beyond elevator pitch. What's the rationale? Why should someone take the rest of what you have to offer seriously? But that was a fun way for us to say, look,
that's great.
We're nimble. We're just trying to be the best small business people we can be. We understand the constraints of your business. Give us a chance. And it was a fun way to do it at the time, for sure.
No, I love that. I think that's such a great idea. And I remember when that happened. I was like, what? Wait, how did he do that? Brian says it's a brilliant idea. Hey, Brian, thanks for tuning in. No, I think that's a great. So did that help you? Because I know you said yesterday something about you do a lot of split base, because obviously it is a Navy strength gin, and some people are afraid. Putting it on the menu.
The other technique we use a lot, because we're not the mainstream brand, is to go in and say, one, and I'm not trying to BS anybody, if you like someone's cocktails, lead with that. Boy, that cocktail's great, and here's what I loved about it. Don't go in and order beer. Go in and order their cocktails. Get to know what their style is. Because I'll tell you, of all the bars just in our home market of New York City, everybody's got a style. And you can see through lines when these menus come out. Even if they're from people, with diverse backgrounds bartending, there's a through line about the sours, about overproof, about stirred and shaken. Wow, I love that idea. What fun that is. How did you come up with that? I always like to ask questions also, so the people that you're working with have an opportunity, but even more so, frankly, are compelled to respond to you, to keep the conversation going. But oftentimes, if there doesn't feel like there's an immediate fit, I do suggest, hey, is there an opportunity to split base our gin with another, our rye whiskey with another, so that we're still talking about, competitive pricing, in New York City anyway, still applying a great local story, but seeing if there's an opportunity to just get the foot in the door to establish that relationship, be gracious enough to say thanks again, and then continue developing the relationship from there.
No, I love that. Yeah, split base is such a great way, especially when you have something, well, when it was more expensive or an overproof, which is not always easy for everybody to drink a full strength 114.
I'll give you one last point around it where, I miss boy, the romance, quite literally, of being able to sit for sessions at bars, whether they're cocktail bars, restaurant bars, neighborhood bars. Obviously, that's not gone by the wayside permanently. I don't think any of us believe that. It's going to come back. But we spend a little bit less time sitting there socializing, but so much more information I find is fed online, not just from retailers, but from on-premise accounts. And sometimes, even at the split-based level, it's a chance to feed information to your accounts customers about why their drink is unique, why it's purposeful, maybe add a section for comments, etc. And the idea of education in this pandemic era has gone so far beyond shelf talkers off premise and one or two sentences from a cocktail menu. If there is perhaps a silver lining, it's that people are spending so much more time self-educating online that it's created great opportunities to share vital information about our brands.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And you can actually add some things to the menus, and menus are so their websites, people are reading now before they're going, because sometimes they're ordering the stuff online. You're getting cocktails to go, exactly. So you are spending time. Great notes. So I know, Jeff, you're working with Woodford, which is not an inexpensive whiskey. So what are your conversations like? What are the type of accounts that you're working with? And then when it's not a cocktail fit, what are the other options that you kind of look to get placements?
Yeah, well, Alan brought up a huge kind of foot in the door piece, and that that split base coming from a brand that's a little bit more expensive is a huge benefit. And Woodford there's so many flavors in Woodford Reserve, so it plays along with a lot of other spirits. So there might be something where talking with a specific account, like this is a little too expensive to kind of go on the menu. Having like, well, have you tried this with, say, a Spanish brandy or a cognac or something that'll kind of bring that price point down and, still play together. And then, this kind of gets you in the door, and, down the road, it might work out that, a full Woodford cocktail works out for them. There are certain restaurants and certain bars that operate with a little higher pour cost, and those are kind of the ones that, are bread and butter, where we'll go in and talk about different SKUs that we have and kind of what would work best. I work a lot with our distributor. So, in California, Woodford Reserve is with RNDC. RNDC within, it's, obviously it varies state by state based on, all the crazy laws, but, in California specifically, there's combo deals on all other kinds of spirits. And sometimes that works out with Brown-Forman, within our umbrella of the spirits that we have. So I'll work with a distributor, or I'll talk with somebody, say about their pour cost going across their entire menu, and just coming from the bar background and having that experience before, and be like, okay, well, is there any way you can get, say, this tequila cocktail that you have, can you bring that down? Let's say that I can help you get the price of your tequila down, where you're knocking out of the park with like a 9 or 10, 11% pour cost that'll make up for maybe your Woodford cocktail being a little bit higher. Are we talking in terms of your overall pour cost for your program? Because then I can work with, our RNDC distributor, who's seeing you at least twice a week while they're putting in your order, and they're going to help you with other spirits across the board. And so, that's in the same realm of, like, well, let's say, again, within the Brown-Forman family, it's like, how much Jack Daniels are you pouring? Because there's always all these crazy deals on Jack Daniels. So what if we can get, so many cases of Jack Daniels in, and then that kind of brings your Woodford cost down. So I work a lot with our distribution company and my distributor reps on helping out the bar, because, obviously if Woodford fits into their cocktail program and I'm able to kind of save them money on their initial pour cost, that's a win for everybody involved. And so even if it might not be one of my specific brands, I'm helping out, one of my friends or, colleagues, or a relationship that I've built, that'll kind of go a long way, say, for the next menu in 6 months when they redo something, it's those little things that I'm helping them out, kind of help me out along the way in the future as well.
No, that's great. I mean, working with distributors is such a key thing, and I don't think so many people take advantage of that. Like knowing, like there are other things in my portfolio that, hey, if we do the deal on that, that's going to help you work with the brand that I'm representing. I think that's a great strategy, and also a win-win for the account when you are building that relationship. I'm not just trying to get my brand in here, but I'm trying to help you as a whole so that you're working within the pour cost, so you're making lots of money, so I can get my brand, but also the fact that your bar is going to make a lot of money. And I think those are the ideal ways of working with any account, and those are the ones that keep coming back to you because they realize this person's not just for themselves, they want to help me make money. Which if you can start doing those for your accounts, and that's why having a bar background is very helpful. I know a lot of people, not everybody comes from the bar, but that's probably one of the biggest benefits you get from having a bartender background if you understand those kind of costs and how you can help somebody else save them.
Yeah, and Elaine, you were asking, we, as I said, we have a bar at our distillery, the Shanty, and sort of in a similar fashion, whether it's by brand ambassadorship or our bar, we keep a library of as many cocktail menus by historical record as we can. I don't mean going back to the 70s and 80s. I mean in our lifespan. What did we find interesting? What did we find relevant? How does it relate to what we're doing now? And those conversations make life so much easier when we're talking to other buyers and bartender colleagues about what they're doing, what they're trying to do purposefully with the brands behind their bar. And let's face it, a lot of it is great romance and great creativity, but a lot of it's also dollars and cents. You can take over a bar program or become the lead person at a bar or restaurant, and you've got someone else's inventory to deal with. And so to be able to have concerted conversations about, this might be interesting, whether it's split base or major or minor feature as part of a cocktail, the more information you have and can reflect on, I think is also, because one is very helpful and it really helps demonstrate that you can walk the walk at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Jeff, you also brought up something yesterday about, there are accounts obviously who can't afford to put the Woodford, but you also have other goals. So if you can't get it on the menu, what's the other option for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think one of the things when being a brand ambassador and having your management team, we have a very open discussion, from the top down of what those KPI structures are going to look like going into whether it's a quarter or we operate within tertiles at Brown-Forman every 4 months. We'll go in and reevaluate. And so some of it is, hey, some of these accounts, Woodford might be a little too expensive. They're like, okay, well, let's shoot for a feature if they do features. If there's no, cocktail specials or something, then it's like, we have, five main expressions that we have at Woodford. So, we'll have goals that'll shift like, okay, well, if it's not going to go on the menu, let's see, 3, back bar placement. And so I'll work with that with a specific account on like, what's going to work. Because obviously I don't want you to kind of do me a favor and bring in a bottle that's just going to sit there and collect dust, because that doesn't really help anybody. And so, is this going to be work through staff trainings? Can I bring in and do staff trainings? Can we set up a happy hour where maybe you guys do a couple menus? I'm going to help you kind of blow through this. But we can kind of structure our KPIs, and it's always this open dialogue that we have, because at the end of the day, we want to help push the brand forward. And so and everybody understands, within Brown-Forman, that's not always going to mean only a menu placement. There's other ways of getting a win in certain accounts that might not be able to work within their structure. And it's also keeps us from being pushy. Like if I know the bars that Woodford is not going to work in the menu, but that doesn't mean that I don't ever show up in there again. I still want to kind of continue to build that relationship and continue to go in and have that brand loyalty with the bartenders, even though I know that it's not going to be necessarily like a win on their menu for, the powers that be that might be kind of looking down and seeing what I'm doing within my market. So we just have a rolling kind of KPI structure on what's going to work and where we can get wins where we can.
No, that's great. And that's going back to Alan's point before about having that open dialogue, having that dialogue between management and the brand ambassador to be able to talk about things. Say like, sometimes it's just not the right fit. But coming with, Lacey Hawkins one time said, but it's also coming back with solutions. Like, okay, so this is not the right fit within
Right.
this account, but this is the other options we have. I think we can get a couple bottles on the back bar. We can obviously get it listed on the whiskey menu. And, I would like to do a staff training with the staff. So that way they at least are aware of it and they can recommend the brand if somebody asks for, a neat pour or something like that. So it's always, but it's that constant dialogue, which I think is so important to Alan's point. It really is that the management is open to hearing this. And then you as a brand ambassador also are taking the time to come up with that plan that you can present some other alternatives. All right, we're coming up on over an hour now, and I'm trying to get these shows shorter. So I am going to skip one or two, but I did want to talk about two last questions. One is because we did talk some things about distributors, right? We're talking about working with the reps, and Jeff, you talked about this because building a rep is, relationships with reps is so important, whether you're brand owners or a brand ambassador. So, what are some of your two things? One of the things, we all have gone on work with, and we've had bad work with and good work with. And then we have reps that you just don't want to deal with, or just reps, you just realize you need to build this relationship with them because they're so valuable to your job of making you successful. So Alan, I'll start with you. Like, what do you do as a brand owner to build a good relationship with the reps? And then do you have anything, key learnings you've learned from going on work with that you would like other people not to repeat?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, as you alluded to, it's not perfect. You have to respect how they make a living, that it's commission based. And this is what's important to them. And I would say, I don't know that it's the most unique, but the things that I try to be most aware of is what are the things on their priority list? Mm-hmm. Is there a way for me to do two things very simply? One, give them enough space as you go appointment to appointment to sell the things they need to. Yes, part of that should be the focus on your brands. And it's usually not just spirits, it's wine and spirits, or it might be beer or other things as well. So you got to be able to give them the space to do that because that's their livelihood. But the other is, with our expertise coming from a bar background and a cocktail background, is there a means for us to appropriately, respectfully, politely help them sell the other products in their book? Mm-hmm. Hey, what are we focused on when we go out next week? I'm not trying to step on your toes, but maybe I might be able to bring some cocktail ideas that include those modifiers or those brands that are in categories that aren't mine, so that you can say, wow, this group, this brand is such an asset to me. I made so much more in commission today that I want to go out with them every month or apply, their expertise. Use me. I'll be your workhorse as long as I get my share, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Let me help you make as much as possible in our time together and demonstrate to your accounts what a great asset you are and we are as a team for their business. Everybody's got to be aware that we're concerned with their bottom line.
No, those are great points. Yeah, definitely asking what they have in their portfolio and making sure whatever cocktails you present definitely is using the products that they carry.
Not just what's in their portfolio, what are their priorities? They're getting whipped monthly. You've got to sell X many cases of this. And next to that if we can be of asset to them to help move what's on their priority list, the calls will go in the other direction. They'll start calling you. Hey, when can you go out again?
Yeah, no, that's such great points. And Jeff, what do you have to build on that? I know you have some similar, but you have some other things we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I've kind of learned over time is making sure that myself, and let's say I'm doing a work with or whoever the rep is that I'm going to be meeting that day, that we're kind of on the same page, so, a lead up to us going out together, I'll obviously check in with them the week before. And then, it could be as easy as a quick email, like, hey, what do you have on the agenda for tomorrow? Because one, I don't want to waste your time. If Woodford is not on your radar, like Alan was saying, it's like you have a focus that is on, Remy, right? They're pushing Remy, and you need to get cognac out there all this week. Like, if this isn't going to work, then like, let's not waste each other's time. But if we are going to go out and we're going to do this, like, let's get a list of accounts down. Do we have places that maybe already have Woodford that we're going to try to set up, do a training, or we're trying to do like maybe push it into a menu, or, doing a private selection? Or is this a brand new account that like maybe they're going through a bunch of Old Forester and they have Ford's Gin on the menu, and they're just like, let's kind of build the portfolio a little bit more. So I think that communication, like leading up to, because when I was first starting out, I'd jump in and work with and just see them that day and be like, all right, what are we doing today? And they're like, we're going to do this, this, and this. I'm like, what? Why are we doing that? Like, that has nothing to do with my world whatsoever. And so, now it's like, if there's a little bit of give and pull going back and forth, like Alan was saying, like giving them their space, be like, hey, if we have to go to a couple accounts, like I'll just bring my laptop and be over here in the corner, like doing this. You go talk about wine, you go talk about cognac, you go talk about whatever you need to do. If you need me to kind of step in, like you're saying, talking about cocktails, or something that's out of my book that, I love spirits all over the place. And so if you want me to kind of come in and help you out, I'm here for that as well. And so I just think it becomes this open dialogue. Again, we've talked about that a lot. Communication at the end of the day is probably the most important part of this job, because you have to have, communication, obviously within your own management structure and your own BAs, and dialogue between accounts, and then a really, really healthy dialogue with whatever distributor rep you're going to be working with.
No, absolutely. And you guys both touched on it, being a team player, but being a team player, but also making sure you're standing up for yourself, like making sure your time is not being wasted, so having that open dialogue, like, this is probably not the right fit, but I know you have to go there. So I'm going to go either, go work on my computer, but to Alan's point and your point, but if you need me, like if you're looking to get more on the menu and you think this could be an asset for them, I'm willing to jump in there for you and present some cocktail ideas. So, and you do become the person, as Alan said, that they call all the time. Like, hey, I'm going to go out that person, because they're not only caring about their portfolio, they care about me, and they were a great asset. And accounts are excited to have us show up together, because they know they're going to get a lot out of this meeting, not just about me trying to sell them stuff, but we're also going to help their bar and restaurant. Really great points, guys. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. And my favorite question I like to end on is basically, a little career advice, right? So for anybody who's looking to become a brand ambassador, or is currently working as one, but might be, only a couple of years in. So outside of, you need to love the brand that you work for, because I think we all agree that is something that is so true. You cannot work for a brand that you do not love and be a brand ambassador. Or else you're the most amazing actor in the world. But none of us recommend that. What advice would you give somebody? If you had a piece of advice you'd like to share with people in the industry, what would it be? Jeff, I'll let you go first.
I touched on this at the very beginning, but it's organization. Like you have to be organized. I think that so many people get into this work because, especially coming from the bar background, you get to see the fun side of a brand ambassador that's coming in, right? They want to do events, and they're buying drinks, and they're buying food, and they want to take you out. And that's a small part of the job. That is a very fun part of the job, is being able to, have an expense account and go out and drink Woodford cocktails in the best bars all over the place. But at the other side of it is the 8 a.m. conference call that you have to be on, and then followed up by the report that you have to send in from that work with that you did, and talking to the distributor, because you have that that work with coming up on Thursday, but on Wednesday night you're going to have an event. Like, your calendar is all over the place with all different kinds of people, all different kinds of calls, spreadsheets, and if you don't have your kind of organizational skills honed in, if you're not on top of your calendar, if you're not on top of your phone calls, to a lot of management structure, whether you work directly for the distillery, or you work for an agency, or you work for a company overall, that's the first thing that they see. They need to see that report that's coming in, and it's due there. Or, are you on this phone call? Like, why were you not on the legal call that we all had to be on? And so if you're not organized, you're not set up, or you just think that, like, you get hired, they give you a credit card and say, bye, like, let us know how it was out there, you're not going to do very well, or you're just going to burn yourself out. You're going to get really frustrated. And so I think the more on top of organizing your daily life is really going to help you exceed.
No, I think that's such a great point. Do you happen to have any tools that you use? Like, I have some systems that I use all the time, but I don't know if you have anything that you use often that helps you.
I'm very methodical with my calendar, and my wife is a very organized person, and so even if we are going to spend a day in the city going and seeing accounts all day together, she will have that we're going to be here, for half an hour, then here, and then we're going to be here, then we're going to be here. So we're able to look at our calendar every day and see kind of where each other are. And that's kind of just given me more of the organization that I need. It's just getting in that habit of always being in my calendar. And it's the first thing I look up when I get up in the morning, and it's the last thing I look at when I go to bed, to see, because obviously being on the West Coast, and a lot of our business structure is structured on the East Coast, is there a 6:37 a.m. call that I need to be on? Which, luckily Brown-Forman is really nice. The West Coast people, we don't have too many of those, but you never know. So it's like the first and last thing that I always look at is just keeping my calendar organized all the time.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I do Sunday planning. Like, every Sunday I plan out my entire week and block out all my time, and it helps me stay on all my projects, which I always have a lot going on. And then, blocking out time. I live on my calendar as well. Alan, you're for yourself. What's your
two thoughts that come to mind is one is always be learning. And whether in our case we focus on gin and rye whiskey at New York Distilling Company, there's a lot more out there. So I feel let's say a personal weakness is agave spirits. So I try to take extra time to look at what's happening in trends in agave spirits. And by trends, I mean, what are people drinking? What are bartenders trying to sell? What's on store shelves? And other categories as well. You really have to be, I think, as well-rounded as possible, because you never know when those things might influence what you're working on. And it just helps to present yourself as the most well-rounded expert as possible. Because it's part of the cultural heritage. It's part of the gastronomic moment that we're all working in. And even in my, lifeline of working in our industry, things have changed significantly 2 or 3 times already. And it's not to say, I feel like I got caught off guard, but that's the pleasure of it. But it's also enabled me, I think, business-wise, to see things a little bit more clearly in a futuristic standpoint and an opportunistic standpoint, to be as well-rounded as possible in any means as part of the industry. And that would include what ingredients people are using, not just in cocktails, but coming out of the kitchen or in the grocery store. Is there a shortage of something? So it's being as well-rounded in the range of gastronomy as possible. And then if you're coming from a bartending or other background in the industry, and think being a brand ambassador is of interest to you, my greatest recommendation is find people that you think are doing a great job and see if they'll let you shadow them for a day or two and get a sense of what their interactions at the very least are like, because I think that's incredibly eye-opening. And you see it from both perspectives. Theirs is the person actually doing the work, and the reactions of the people that they're trying to interact with and create communication with.
No, I think that's great advice, because I think the biggest shock for a lot of people is when they go from one side of the bar to the other, and and they're like, oh, my friend who was my friend, now suddenly I have to sell to him, right, and he's not as friendly. But great words of advice. If you can actually shadow somebody, that is really great. People are always willing to, and also because being a brand ambassador can be very lonely. So, because you can be out and about, not everybody. I love the fact, Jeff, that you're able to go out with your wife. So it does help to have somebody with you. So I think that's great words of advice for many people looking to have that to have that career, and always learning. Yeah, I think that's something we can never stop doing. Keeping up to date and what's going on in the industry is really important. But I never thought, but yeah, it's definitely important to look at what's coming out of the kitchen, because something, that ingredient that suddenly became hot there is now ending up in the cocktails, and suddenly there's a spirit being made from it, or something of that nature. But gentlemen, this was a really great conversation. I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for being on the show. And hopefully, Jeff, one of these days I'll get to have a drink with you in person, maybe a Tails.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's actually happening this year in person, so looking forward to it. And Alan, well, you're just a subway away, so we're overdue.
Cheers! Thank you very much.
Thank you,
guys.
guys.
Thank you so much, Elaine.
Yeah,
good talking to you, Alan.
Thanks.
You too, Jeff.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Have a great day.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.